My wife leaned over to her high-priced lawyer and whispered loud enough for the entire courtroom to hear. "Look at him, Jonathan. He is wearing the same suit he wore to our son's graduation 15 years ago. He is pathetic. He cannot afford a parking ticket, let alone a lawyer." She covered her mouth to hide a giggle, and her lawyer smirked, checking his expensive watch as if my presence was wasting his billable hours. I stood there alone at the defendant's table, clutching my old hat, feeling the weight of 70 years pressing down on my shoulders. I looked like exactly what they thought I was, a retired history teacher who had been outsmarted and outmaneuvered. Victoria adjusted her pearls, the ones I had bought her for our 30th anniversary, and looked at me with pure contempt. She thought she had already won. She thought this was the end of the story. But then the heavy oak doors at the back of the room swung open with a loud thud that silenced the murmurs in the gallery. The air in the room changed instantly. The man who walked in did not look like a public defender. He wore a custom navy Italian suit that probably cost more than my car. He walked with the confidence of a predator entering familiar waters. He carried a leather briefcase that looked like it held secrets that could destroy empires. Victoria's smile vanished instantly. Her lawyer, Jonathan Ashford, actually dropped his pen. His mouth fell open as he stared at the man walking down the center aisle. The stranger did not look at the judge. He did not look at the opposing counsel. He looked straight at me with a warmth that terrified everyone else in the room. He walked right up to my table, placed a hand on my shoulder, and said loud and clear, "Hello, Mr. Black. I apologize for being late, but traffic was murder." I looked at Victoria. The blood had drained from her face. She looked like she had seen a ghost, and in a way she had. But before I tell you how a retired history teacher with a pension that barely covers groceries ended up with the most feared legal shark in Chicago standing by his side, let me take you back to where this nightmare began. It was exactly 1 month ago on the night of my 70th birthday. If you are enjoying this story, please hit the like button to support this old man. Subscribe to the channel so you do not miss the next parts of my life story. And tell me in the comments where you are watching from. It brings me joy to know who is listening. I was standing alone in the kitchen of the house I had paid for, with 40 years of chalk dust and grading papers. The silence in the house was heavy, the kind of silence that rings in your ears. It was 7 o'clock in the evening. On the granite countertop sat a modest vanilla sponge cake. I had baked it myself that afternoon. My hands, which have started to tremble a bit with age, were carefully spreading white frosting over the top with a butter knife. I was turning 70 years old today. A milestone. 70. You would expect a party, or at least a family dinner. But the house was empty. The lights were off in the living room. I placed 2 candles on the cake. Just 2 because 70 would have been a fire hazard, and frankly, I did not have the energy to blow them all out. I was waiting. Just waiting. The back door opened, and the sudden noise made me jump. Victoria walked in. The clicking of her heels on the hardwood floor sounded like gunfire in the quiet house. She was wearing a new coat, something expensive that I did not recognize. She did not look at me. She did not smile. She did not sing happy birthday. She did not hold a gift box or a bottle of wine. She held a thick, manila envelope in her manicured hand. "You are late," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, trying to keep the hurt out of it. "I made a cake." Victoria stopped at the kitchen island. She looked at the cake with a mixture of disgust and pity. Then, without saying a word, she tossed the heavy folder onto the counter. It landed directly on top of my cake. The weight of the papers crushed the sponge. The white frosting smeared onto the brown envelope. The 2 unlit candles rolled onto the floor and broke. That was my birthday present. "Sign it, Thomas," she said. Her voice was cold. Not angry, just cold, like a business transaction. I looked at the ruined cake, then at the folder. "What is this, Victoria?" "It is freedom," she said, taking a bottle of water from the fridge and ignoring the mess she had made. "It is divorce papers. I had Jonathan Ashford draw them up. Do not bother reading the fine print. It is standard. I want a divorce and I want it now. My heart felt like it had stopped beating. I stared at her, trying to find the woman I had married 40 years ago. The woman I had worked 2 jobs for. The woman I had nursed through sickness. But she was not there. In her place was a stranger with cold eyes and a cruel mouth. A divorce, I stammered. But Victoria, why? It is my birthday. We have been married for 40 years. That is exactly the problem, Thomas. She snapped, slamming the water bottle down. 40 years. 40 years of mediocrity. 40 years of clipping coupons. 40 years of listening to your boring stories about the Civil War. I am sick of it. I am 62 years old, Thomas. I still have good years left. I am beautiful. I am vibrant. And I am not going to spend the rest of my life watching you wither away in that recliner waiting for death. Her words were like physical blows. I gripped the edge of the counter to steady myself. But I provided for you, I said, my voice weak. I worked extra shifts. I tutored students until 9 at night, so you could stay home, so you could go to the spa, so you could have that car. That is not providing, Thomas, that is surviving, she scoffed. You were a teacher, a high school teacher. You never had ambition. You never tried to be more. And now look at you. You are old. You are tired. And frankly, Thomas, you are useless to me now. She tapped a long red fingernail on the envelope. So here is the deal. I want the house. It is valued at $1.2 million now, thanks to the market. I want 70% of our retirement savings. And I want spousal support for the next 5 years. $5,000 a month. I felt like I was choking. 70%, I whispered. But Victoria, that is my pension. That is everything I saved. The house payments came from my salary. You never contributed a dime to the mortgage. It is compensation, Thomas, she said, leaning in, her face twisting into a sneer. Compensation for the wasted years, for the boredom, for the fact that I could have married a doctor or a lawyer, but I settled for you. I deserve to enjoy the rest of my life. I deserve to travel. I deserve luxury. And you owe it to me. She looked around the kitchen I had renovated with my own hands to save money so she could have the cabinets she wanted. Besides, she added, waving her hand dismissively, what do you need money for? You are 70. You do not go anywhere. You do not do anything. You can move into a small apartment or a nursing home. It does not matter to me. Just give me what I want. I looked at the papers again. The name Jonathan Ashford was printed in bold letters at the top. I knew that name. Everyone in Chicago knew that name. He was a predator, a lawyer who specialized in destroying husbands and leaving them destitute. I cannot sign this. Victoria, I said, straightening up, trying to find a shred of dignity. This is not fair. I will not sign this. I will not let you take everything I worked for. Victoria laughed. It was a harsh, dry sound. Oh, Thomas, do not be stupid. Who are you going to fight me with? You have no money for a retainer. You have no connections. You are just a retired teacher in a polyester shirt. Jonathan Ashford will eat you alive. If you do not sign these papers tonight, I will sue you for everything. I will claim emotional abuse. I will claim you are senile. I will make sure you end up on the street with nothing but the clothes on your back. She walked over to me and got right in my face. I could smell the expensive wine on her breath. Sign it, Thomas. Do not make this harder than it has to be. You lost. You lost a long time ago, you just did not realize it until now. She turned and walked out of the kitchen, leaving me standing there with my ruined birthday cake and the wreckage of my life. I heard her go upstairs and slam the bedroom door. The lock clicked. I was a prisoner in my own home, isolated, threatened, and completely alone. I looked down at the frosting smeared on the legal documents. My hand was shaking uncontrollably. I realized then that she had planned this. She had waited for this day. She wanted to hurt me. It wasn't just about the money. It was about cruelty. She wanted to break me. But as I wiped a smudge of vanilla frosting off the word divorce, a small spark of anger ignited in my chest. It was faint, but it was there. I was old, yes. I was tired, yes. But I was a historian. I knew that empires that grew arrogant and cruel always fell. And Victoria had just made a fatal mistake. She had assumed that because I was quiet, I was weak. I did not sign the papers that night. Instead, I scraped the ruined cake into the trash bin. I washed the counter. And then I sat in the dark listening to the silence of the house, and for the first time in 40 years, I did not feel love for the woman upstairs. I felt war. I did not sleep that night. I sat in my old leather recliner in the living room, watching the sun come up over the neighborhood I had lived in for 4 decades. The house felt different now. It felt cold. It felt like a corpse. Every creak of the floorboards sounded like an accusation. My eyes were burning from exhaustion and the remnants of unshed tears, but my mind was racing. I kept hoping that maybe when the sun fully rose, Victoria would come downstairs and tell me it was a mistake, that she had been drunk, that she had been stressed, that she did not mean to throw away 40 years of marriage like a used napkin. But the only sound from upstairs was silence. She was probably sleeping soundly. The wicked usually do. At 9 o'clock the doorbell rang. The sound startled me out of my daze. I stood up, my knees, tears popping, and walked to the door. A flicker of hope ignited in my chest. Maybe it was Lucas, my son, my boy. He would understand. He would talk sense into his mother. He had always been a mama's boy, yes, but surely he had a conscience. Surely he remembered who had taught him to ride a bike, who had paid for his 3 failed attempts at college, who had bailed him out of debt more times than I could count. I opened the door, and there he was. Lucas. 38 years old, but dressed like he was 25 in a jacket that was too tight, and shoes that cost more than my monthly grocery bill. He looked tired. He looked impatient. Lucas, I said, breathing out a sigh of relief. Thank God you are here. Your mother has gone crazy. She served me divorce papers. On my birthday. I stepped back to let him in, expecting a hug. Expecting him to look shocked. Expecting him to ask if I was all right. Lucas did not hug me. He walked past me into the foyer, bringing the smell of stale cigarettes and expensive cologne with him. He did not look at my face. He looked at the walls. He looked at the antique grandfather clock in the hallway. He looked at the high ceilings. He was not looking at his childhood home. He was looking at real estate. He was looking at square footage. He was looking at a price tag. He walked into the living room and stood in the center of the rug, keeping his hands in his pockets. I followed him, closing the door softly. Son, I said, walking around to face him. Did you hear what I said? She wants to take everything. She wants the house. She wants 70% of my pension. It is insanity. Lucas finally looked at me. His eyes were the same shade of blue as mine, but there was no warmth in them. There was only a flat calculation, a boredom that chilled me to the bone. Yeah, Dad, I know, he said, his voice flat. Mom called me last night. She told me everything. He walked over to the fireplace and picked up a small porcelain figurine my mother had left me. He turned it over in his hands, checking the bottom for a maker's mark, checking its value. And I asked, waiting for him to finish the sentence, waiting for him to say he told her she was wrong. And I think you need to stop being dramatic, Dad, Lucas said, putting the figurine back down with a careless clatter. Honestly, you are making this harder than it needs to be. Just sign the papers. I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. I stared at him, unable to comprehend the words coming out of his mouth. Sign them, I whispered. Lucas, this is my life. This is my retirement. If I give her what she wants, I will have nothing. I will be on the street." Lucas rolled his eyes. He actually rolled his eyes at me. "Oh, please, Dad. You are not going to be on the street. You can get a little apartment somewhere, or move into a senior living place. They have those places where they cook for you. It would probably be better for you anyway. You are getting old. You do not need a big house like this. It is wasteful." He gestured around the room with a sweep of his hand. "Look at this place. It is 4 bedrooms. It is sitting on a half-acre lot in a prime school district. Do you have any idea what this property is worth right now? The market is hot, Dad. If Mom sells this now, she is set." "If Mom sells it," I repeated, my voice rising. "Lucas, this is my home. I built that deck out back. I planted those trees. I paid the mortgage for 30 years. "So what?" Lucas snapped, his facade of patience cracking. "So what, Dad? You paid for it. That was your job. You were the husband. You were the father. You were supposed to pay for things. That does not mean you own us." He took a step closer to me, and for the first time I saw the sneer on his face. It was the same sneer Victoria had worn the night before. "Mom has suffered enough, Dad. She has been stuck in this house with you for 40 years, clipping coupons, counting pennies, driving used cars. She deserves a chance to actually live before she dies. She wants to travel. She wants to buy nice things. She wants to be happy. And you are just standing in her way like a giant anchor." "Suffered," I choked out the word. "Suffered. Lucas, I worked 2 jobs. I tutored until my eyes blurred. I drove a 10-year-old sedan so she could have the SUV. And I did it for you too." I looked at him, really looked at him, and the memories came flooding back. Not the happy memories of playing catch in the yard, but the other memories, the expensive ones. "Lucas, do you remember when you totaled that car when you were 19? Who paid for the lawyer to keep you out of jail? Who paid the fines? Me. Do you remember when you wanted to start that marketing business that went nowhere? Who gave you the $10,000 for startup capital? Me. Do you remember 3 years ago when you had those gambling debts and those men were threatening you? Who emptied his emergency savings to save your legs? Me." I pointed a shaking finger at his chest. "I sacrificed everything for you, Lucas. I decimated my savings for you. And now you stand here and tell me I am an anchor." Lucas batted my hand away. His face flushed red, but not with shame. With anger. With the petulant rage of a child who hates being reminded of his debts. "Stop throwing that in my face," he shouted. "That is all you ever do. You hold money over our heads. You think because you wrote a few checks you are some kind of saint. Well, guess what, Dad? Money is all you had to offer. You were boring. You were strict. You were never fun. Mom was the fun one. Mom understands me." He straightened his jacket, smoothing the lapels with jerky, angry movements. "And you know what, Dad? Mom promised me that when the settlement goes through, she is going to help me out. She is going to invest in my new venture. She believes in me. Unlike you." The truth hit me like a physical blow to the stomach. It wasn't just loyalty to his mother. It was greed. Pure, simple, naked greed. Victoria had bought him. She had promised him a cut of my carcass. She had told him that if he helped her skin me alive, he would get a piece of the meat. I looked at my son, and I realized I did not know him. I had raised a stranger. I had watered a weed thinking it was a flower. "So that is it," I said, my voice surprisingly calm. "It is about the money. She promised you money." Lucas shrugged, a cruel, indifferent shrug. "She is generous, Dad. She knows I need a break. And honestly, why do you need the money? You are 70 years old. You are going to die soon anyway. What are you going to do with $1 million? Take it to the grave. Let Mom enjoy it. Let me enjoy it. Stop being so selfish for once in your life. Selfish. The word hung in the air between us. The man who had worn holes in his shoes so his son could have Nikes was being called selfish by the man wearing the Nikes. Something inside me snapped. It wasn't a loud snap. It was the quiet sound of a bridge burning. The bridge that connected me to this ungrateful parasite standing in my living room. "Get out," I said. Lucas looked surprised. "What?" "Get out of my house," I said louder this time, my voice resonating off the walls. "Get out of the house I paid for. Get out of the house you want to sell out from under me. Get out before I forget that you are my son and I call the police." Lucas let out a harsh laugh. "You are kicking me out." "Seriously, Dad. You are pathetic. This is exactly why Mom is leaving you. You are a bitter, angry old man." He turned and walked to the door. He opened it, and the morning light flooded in, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. He paused on the threshold and looked back at me one last time. There was no love in his face, only malice. "You are going to regret this, Dad," he spat. "You are going to die alone in this big empty house and no one is going to care. And do not think you can fight this. Mom has Jonathan Ashford. He is a shark. He is going to peel you like a grape. He is going to strip you down to your underwear and leave you shivering in the cold. And I am going to laugh when he does it." He slammed the door. The sound echoed through the house, shaking the frames of the family photos on the wall. Photos of him as a baby. Photos of him graduating. Photos of a family that had never really existed. I stood there in the silence, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. My hands were trembling so bad, I had to grip the back of the sofa to stay upright. I looked around the room. It suddenly looked different. It didn't look like a home anymore. It looked like a battlefield. They wanted a war. My wife wanted to destroy me. My son wanted to sell me for parts. They thought I was weak. They thought I was just an old teacher who would roll over and die. I walked to the window and watched Lucas get into his leased BMW and speed away. I took a deep breath. The air in the house felt stale. "I need a lawyer," I said to the empty room. But not just any lawyer. I needed a monster. If they were bringing a shark, I needed a megalodon. And suddenly, a name popped into my head. A name from 30 years ago. A name that used to be written on detention slips, but was now written on the headlines of the Chicago Tribune. Anthony Russo. I didn't know if he would remember me. I didn't know if he would help me. But as I looked at the spot where my son had stood and told me to die, I knew one thing for sure. I was not going down without a fight. I went to the kitchen, picked up the phone book, and started looking for a number. It was time to call in a favor. The silence that filled the house after Lucas slammed the door was not peaceful. It was heavy. It was the kind of silence that presses against your eardrums and makes the blood rushing in your veins sound like a roaring river. I stood in the living room for a long time, staring at the dust motes dancing in the shaft of morning light. My son was gone. My wife was gone. And I was standing in a house that I had paid for with 40 years of sweat and chalk dust, but which suddenly felt like it belonged to a stranger. I retreated to my study. It was a small room off the hallway lined with bookshelves that I had built myself. It smelled of old paper and pipe tobacco, even though I had quit smoking 20 years ago. This used to be my sanctuary. It was where I graded papers. It was where I planned lessons on the Revolutionary War and the Great Depression. It was where I retreated when the noise of the world got too loud. Now, as I sank into the creaky office chair, it felt less like a sanctuary and more like a bunker. My stomach gave a loud growl, reminding me that I had not eaten since lunch the day before. The birthday cake was in the trash. The fridge was mostly empty because Victoria usually did the shopping on Thursdays, and today was Wednesday. I needed food. I needed coffee. I needed to think. I pulled my wallet out of my back pocket and opened it. The leather was worn soft and smooth. Inside there were 4 $10 bills. $40. That was the physical cash I had on hand. I wasn't worried, though. We had a joint credit card with a high limit that we used for household expenses, and I had my debit card linked to our joint checking account. I opened my laptop and logged into the grocery delivery service we used. I added bread, eggs, coffee, and a frozen dinner to the cart. It wasn't a feast, but it would keep me going. I clicked checkout. The screen spun for a moment, and then a red box popped up. Payment declined. I frowned. That was impossible. I paid the bill in full every month. I tried again. Payment declined. Please contact your financial institution. A cold prickle of unease started at the base of my neck. I opened a new tab and logged into our bank account. Or I tried to. User ID not found. My hands started to tremble. I typed it again, slowly, carefully pecking at the keys with my index finger. User ID not found. I grabbed the phone and dialed the number on the back of my debit card. After 5 minutes of navigating a robotic menu, I finally got a human being on the line. I am sorry, Mr. Black, the operator said, her voice sounding bored and detached. That card has been reported lost or stolen by the primary account holder, Mrs. Victoria Black. A new card has been issued and mailed to her alternate address. As you are the secondary holder on the joint account, she has the right to freeze access to secondary cards. But that is my money, I said, my voice rising in panic. That is my pension check. It gets deposited there every month. I understand, sir, the operator said. But the account is frozen for security reasons pending the issuance of new cards. You will need to visit a branch with the primary holder to unlock it. I hung up the phone. I did not slam it. I placed it down gently, because if I slammed it, I might never stop breaking things. She had cut me off. She had severed the financial artery. I was a 70-year-old man with $40 in his pocket, and no access to the money I had earned for half a century. Just then my computer pinged. A new email notification slid onto the screen. The subject line read, Draft Marital Settlement Agreement Urgent. The sender was Jonathan Ashford S. Crew. I stared at the screen. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I didn't want to open it. I knew that opening it would make it real. But I had to know. I clicked the mouse. The document was 20 pages long. Legal jargon. Whereases and therefores. But the summary on the first page was clear enough. It was brutal. It was a declaration of war written in 12-point Times New Roman font. Item 1. The marital residence. The husband, Thomas Black, agrees to vacate the premises within 30 days of this notice. Failure to vacate will result in an eviction order enforced by the Cook County Sheriff. 30 days. She wanted me out in 30 days. Where was I supposed to go? With what money? Item 2. Asset division. The wife, Victoria Black, shall receive 70% of the husband's total retirement assets, including state pension and 401k holdings, citing the disparity in future earning potential and lifestyle maintenance. 70%. That would leave me with barely enough to rent a room in a basement somewhere. I would be eating cat food. I would be destitute. Item 3. Spousal support. Due to the husband's financial control and the wife's lack of employment history during the marriage, the husband agrees to pay $5,000 monthly for a period of 5 years. I laughed. It was a wet, choking sound. $5,000. My pension check was $4,800. She wanted more than I made. She wanted blood. She wanted to wring me dry until I was just a husk. I sat back in my chair and looked around the room. The history books on the shelves seemed to mock me. I had spent my life teaching about battles and strategies about men who stood up against tyranny. But here I was being dismantled piece by a woman I had shared a bed with for 40 years. The panic began to set in then. It wasn't the sharp adrenaline of a fight. It was the cold, heavy weight of dread. I was 70 years old. My knees hurt when it rained. I took pills for my blood pressure. I couldn't just go out and get a job at a construction site. I was vulnerable. And for the first time in my life, I felt truly unsafe. I needed help. I needed an ally. I couldn't call Lucas. He had made his position clear. But I had friends. I had people I had known for decades. People who knew me. People who knew I was a good man. I picked up the phone again and dialed Jerry's number. Jerry and I had played poker every Friday night for 15 years until his arthritis got too bad. He was a good guy, a retired mechanic. He would help me. He would at least lend me a few $100s until I could sort out the bank mess. The phone rang 4 times. Then it clicked. Hello, Jerry's voice sounded cautious. Jerry, it is Tom, I said, trying to sound normal, trying to keep the desperation out of my voice. How are you doing? There was a long pause, an uncomfortable silence that stretched for seconds. Oh, hi, Tom. Look, I am kind of busy right now. Jerry, I need to talk to you, I said quickly before he could hang up. Victoria has gone off the deep end. She served me divorce papers. She locked the bank accounts. I am sitting here with $40 to my name. I just need a little help to get groceries until I can get to the bank. Another pause. Then Jerry sighed. It was a heavy, judgmental sigh. Look, Tom, I don't want to get in the middle of it, he said. But Victoria called me yesterday. She told me what happened. What happened? I asked, confused. Nothing happened. She just walked in and demanded a divorce. That is not what she said, Tom. She said you have been getting aggressive. She said you threw a cake at her. She said you have been forgetting things, that you are losing it upstairs. She said she is afraid for her safety. My mouth fell open. Threw a cake. Losing it. It was a lie. A vicious, calculated lie. Jerry. That is insane, I sputtered. I baked a cake for my birthday. She dropped the papers on it. I never touched her. You know me. We have been friends for 20 years. You know I would never hurt a fly. Do I? Jerry asked, his voice cold. Victoria sounded pretty shook up, Tom. She said you were yelling. She said you threatened her. And honestly, lately you have been repeating yourself a lot. Maybe she is right. Maybe you need help, professional help, not money. Jerry, please listen to me. I gotta go, Tom. Do not call here again. My wife does not want me talking to you if you are violent. The line went dead. I sat there holding the receiver, the dial tone buzzing in my ear like an angry insect. She had poisoned the well. She hadn't just stolen my money. She had stolen my reputation. She had stolen my friends. She had painted a picture of me as a senile, abusive monster. And because she was charming, because she was the social butterfly, everyone believed her. I tried one more number. Stan. We fished together. Stan didn't even pick up. It went straight to voicemail. I didn't leave a message. I knew it was pointless. I put the phone down. The sun had moved across the room, casting long shadows over my desk. I looked at the email from Jonathan Ashford again. 30 days. I opened my wallet and took out the 4 $10 bills. I laid them on the desk next to the computer. That was it. That was my arsenal. That was my shield against the world. $40 and a suit that was 20 years out of style. I was completely, absolutely alone. I walked to the window and looked out at the street. A neighbor was walking his dog. A mail truck drove by. The world was turning. People were living their lives. And inside this brick house on Elm Street, a man was being erased. I felt a tear slide down my cheek. I wiped it away angrily. No. I would not cry. Crying was for men who had given up. Crying was for men who accepted their fate. I looked at the phone book sitting on the corner of the desk. I remembered the name I had thought of earlier, Anthony Russo, the kid from the wrong side of the tracks who I had kept out of juvenile detention. The kid who had told me 30 years ago, Mr. Black, nobody ever stood up for me before. I didn't know if he would remember me. I didn't know if he would take the call. But looking at that eviction notice, looking at those 4 crumpled bills, I knew I had no other choice. It was a Hail Mary pass. It was a shot in the dark. But it was the only shot I had left. I sat back down. I pulled the phone book toward me. I opened it to the yellow pages under attorneys, and I began to search. The walk to the First National Bank branch took me 45 minutes. It should have been a 5-minute drive, but Victoria had taken the keys to the Buick. She had taken them off the hook by the door this morning, with a smirk that told me she knew exactly what she was doing. She wanted me immobilized. She wanted me trapped in that house like a rat in a cage. But she had forgotten that I walked to school every day for 40 years when the snow was deep or the car wouldn't start. My knees ached with every step on the concrete, and the humidity of the Chicago afternoon made my shirt stick to my back, but I kept putting one foot in front of the other. I had $40 in my pocket, and a desperate need to know just how deep the knife had gone. When I pushed open the heavy glass doors of the bank, the blast of air conditioning hit me like a pummel of ice. It was quiet inside, the kind of hushed, sterile quiet that makes you feel like you should whisper. I wiped the sweat from my forehead with my sleeve, trying to look like a respectable customer and not a desperate old man who had just walked 2 miles in dress shoes that had needed replacing 5 years ago. I approached the teller window. The young woman behind the glass looked up, and her professional smile faltered for a second before turning into a look of genuine recognition. "Mr. Black," she said, her voice brightening. "Is that you?" I squinted at her through my glasses. The name tag on her blazer read Sarah. Then it clicked. Sarah Jenkins, class of 2005. She had sat in the front row of my American history class. She was quiet, diligent, always turned her homework in on time. "Hello, Sarah," I said, trying to keep the tremble out of my voice. "It is good to see you. You are doing well, I see." "I am Mr. Black," she beamed. "I just got promoted to senior teller last month. How are you? How is Mrs. Black?" The mention of Victoria made my stomach lurch. I gripped the edge of the marble counter to steady myself. The cool stone felt grounding against my clammy palms. "We are fine, Sarah," I lied. The lie tasted like ash in my mouth. "I am actually here to check on our accounts. The online system seems to be down for me, and I need to see the balance of the joint savings, the retirement fund." "Of course," she said, typing quickly on her keyboard. "That happens sometimes. Let me pull it up for you." I watched her fingers dance across the keys. I held my breath. I knew there should be roughly $400,000 in that account. It was not a fortune to some people, but to me it was everything. It was 40 years of skipped vacations. It was 40 years of brown bag lunches. It was the safety net that was supposed to catch us when we were too old to work. It was my life's blood distilled into numbers. Sarah stopped typing. Her eyebrows drew together in a frown. She tapped a few more keys, then leaned closer to the screen. The smile slid off her face, completely replaced by a look of confusion and then concern. "Mr. Black," she said slowly. "Which account did you say?" "The retirement savings." "Yes," I said, my heart beginning to hammer against my ribs. "The joint savings ending in 459. Sarah looked at me and then back at the screen. She bit her lip. "Mr. Black," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "That account has a balance of $1,200.14. The world tilted. The sounds of the bank, the low hum of the computers, the murmur of other customers faded into a high-pitched ringing in my ears. My knees buckled, and I had to lean my full weight against the counter to keep from collapsing right there on the lobby floor. 1,000, I choked out. That is impossible, Sarah. There must be a mistake. There was $400,000 in there. I saw the statement 6 months ago. Sarah looked pained. She turned the monitor slightly so I could see, but my vision was too blurry to make out the numbers. I am so sorry, Mr. Black, she said softly. But the withdrawals are all here. They started about 6 months ago. Large cash withdrawals, maximum daily limits, and several large transfers. I felt like I was drowning. 6 months. She had been planning this for 6 months. While I was grading papers, while I was cooking dinner, while I was sleeping next to her, she had been systematically draining our future. What I whispered. What reason? Sarah clicked on a few transaction details. Most of them are listed under personal withdrawals, she said. But there is a note here on the largest transfer. It says real estate investment. Real estate. We had never discussed real estate. We owned our house outright. We had no plans to move. It was a lie. A bold-faced recorded lie. I stood there breathing hard, feeling the sweat turn cold on my skin. I was 70 years old, and I was broke. I had $1,200 to my name. I was going to die in a state-run facility alone and forgotten. The panic was rising in my throat like bile. Sarah looked around. The branch manager was in his glass office on the phone laughing at something. The other tellers were busy. Sarah reached under the counter and pulled out a sheet of paper. She started printing. The sound of the printer was loud in the silence between us. She grabbed the stack of papers still warm from the machine and slid them across the counter to me. She placed her hand over mine for a brief second. Her skin was warm. It was the first human touch I had felt in 24 hours that wasn't meant to hurt me. Mr. Black, she whispered, leaning in close so the security cameras wouldn't pick up her audio. I am not supposed to do this without a fee, and I am not supposed to give you the detailed transaction history without the primary cardholder present since the account status is flagged. But you were the only teacher who gave me an extension when my mom got sick. I never forgot that. She tapped the paper with her index finger, pointing to a series of recurring transactions. Look at these, she hissed. These aren't cash withdrawals. These are wire transfers. They are going to an LLC. I looked down at the paper. My eyes focused on the line she was pointing to. Dave Consulting LLC. $5,000. $10,000. $3,000. The name appeared over and over again like a drumbeat. Dave. 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 Who is Dave? I asked, my voice hollow. I do not know, she said. But Mr. Black, look at the dates. Every time there is a transfer to Dave Consulting, there is a corresponding charge on the credit card statement for travel. Airlines, hotels, expensive ones. She flipped the page. Cabo, Miami, Las Vegas. I stared at the locations. Victoria had gone to those places. She had told me she was visiting her sister in Ohio. She had told me she was going on a church retreat. She had told me she needed time alone to clear her head. She had been with Dave. The realization hit me harder than the loss of the money. It wasn't just greed. It was infidelity. It was a double life. She hadn't just stolen my retirement, she had stolen my trust. She had financed her affair with the money I saved by eating bologna sandwiches. Sarah looked at me with tears in her eyes. Mr. Black, you need to take this to a lawyer. A good one. This looks like dissipation of assets. That is what they call it when a spouse spends marital money on an affair. It is illegal. Dissipation of assets. It sounded so clinical, so dry. It didn't capture the feeling of having your heart ripped out of your chest and your wallet stolen at the same time. Thank you, Sarah, I said. My voice sounded strange to my own ears, like it was coming from underwater. "Thank you for this." She nodded, wiping her eye quickly. "Be careful, Mr. Black. Whoever this Dave is, he is taking you for everything." I took the stack of papers. They felt heavy in my hand, heavier than the 4 $10 bills in my pocket. These papers were the autopsy report of my marriage. They were the proof of my stupidity. I turned away from the counter. I didn't look back. I couldn't bear to see the pity in Sarah's eyes. I walked out of the bank and into the blinding sunlight. The heat hit me again, but I felt cold, freezing cold. I looked at the papers in my hand. Dave Consulting. The name mocked me. I started the long walk back home, but I wasn't walking home to surrender. I was walking home to plan. I had a name now. I had a paper trail. Victoria thought I was a senile old fool who wouldn't notice the money was gone until it was too late. She thought I would just curl up and die. But she had forgotten one thing. I was a history teacher. I knew that every tyrant eventually made a mistake. Every dictator eventually overplayed their hand. Victoria had left fingerprints. She had left a trail, and I was going to follow it. I folded the papers and put them inside my jacket pocket right next to my heart. I walked faster now, ignoring the pain in my knees. I had to get to a phone. I had to find Anthony Russo, and I had to show him what Dave Consulting really was. I walked back into the house just as the sun was dipping below the horizon, casting long shadows across the front lawn. The walk from the bank had been grueling, and my legs were screaming in protest. But as I unlocked the front door, a smell hit me that stopped me dead in my tracks. It was the rich, savory aroma of pot roast with rosemary and garlic. It was my favorite meal. It was the meal Victoria used to make on our anniversaries back when we still celebrated them. It was the smell of home, or at least the memory of what home used to be. I stepped inside and closed the door quietly behind me. The house was transformed. The harsh, cold atmosphere of the morning had been replaced by a staging of domestic warmth. The lights in the dining room were dimmed. There were fresh flowers on the table, probably cut from the garden I tended. And there was Victoria standing by the oven, wearing an apron over her expensive clothes, holding a glass of red wine. She turned when she heard me, and for a second, I saw the calculation in her eyes, before she masked it with a smile that was terrifyingly familiar. It was the smile she used when she wanted something. It was the smile she used on the neighbors, on the PTA, on everyone she needed to manipulate. "Thomas," she said, her voice soft and lilting. "You are back. I was getting worried. You were gone a long time." I looked at her. I looked at the woman who had drained our bank account to fund her affair with a man named Dave. I looked at the woman who had left me with $1,200 and a broken heart. And I realized that I had to give the performance of my life. If she suspected I knew about the money, if she suspected I had seen Sarah at the bank, she would call Jonathan Ashford, and they would bury me before I could take another breath. "I just went for a walk," I said, letting my shoulders slump, letting the exhaustion I felt show plainly on my face. "I needed to clear my head, Victoria. I just walked." She walked over to me, and for a moment, I thought she was going to hug me. I flinched internally, bracing myself for the touch of Judas. But she just patted my arm gently. "I understand, Thomas," she said soothingly. "It is a lot to process. I know I was harsh yesterday. I was emotional. But I made your favorite. Pot roast. Just the way you like it. Why don't you wash up and we can sit down? We can talk like civilized people." I went to the powder room and splashed cold water on my face. I looked at myself in the mirror. My eyes looked haunted, but there was a steeliness behind them now that hadn't been there yesterday. I dried my face, took a deep breath, and walked into the lion's den. We sat at the dining table. She had set out the good china. She poured me a glass of wine. I took a sip. It was good wine, probably bought with my money, Probably the same wine she drank with Dave in Cabo. The thought made bile rise in my throat, but I forced myself to swallow it, along with a piece of tender beef. "This is delicious, Victoria," I said, my voice flat. "Thank you." She smiled and took a sip of her own wine. "I am glad you like it, Thomas. I wanted us to have a nice evening. I know this divorce is hard for you. Change is always hard when you get older. But I really believe it is for the best. For both of us. You will see. Once you are settled in a smaller place, you will feel less burdened. You won't have to worry about the yard or the gutters. It will be a simpler life. A simpler life. A life of poverty. A life of erasure." I put my fork down. I decided to test the waters. I needed to hear her say it. I needed to hear the lie directly from her lips so I could lock it away in the vault of my anger. "Victoria," I said, looking down at my plate, "I have been thinking about the numbers, about the settlement." She tensed. I saw it in the way her hand tightened around the stem of her wine glass. "What about them, Thomas?" she asked, keeping her voice casual. "Well," I said, playing the confused old man, 70% of the savings. That is a lot, Victoria. And I was trying to remember, how much is in there exactly? I haven't looked at the statements in a while. I just want to make sure I will have enough to, buy food." She laughed. It was a light tinkling sound that grated on my nerves like sandpaper. "Oh, Thomas, do not worry about the details. That is what the lawyers are for. But to be honest, there isn't as much as you probably remember." I looked up at her. My face remained blank, but my heart was hammering. "What do you mean?" I asked. She sighed and put on a mask of tragic resignation. She swirled the wine in her glass, looking into the red liquid, as if divining the future. "The market. Thomas. You know how it is. The economy has been terrible lately. Our investments, they took a big hit. A very big hit. Most of that 400,000 is gone. Poof. Just vanished into thin air. It is tragic, really." She looked me right in the eye. "That is why I need the house, Thomas. It is the only asset we have left with any real value. The cash is basically gone. If we split what is left of the savings you would get, maybe a few $1,000s. It is sad, but that is the reality of the world we live in. Inflation, recessions. We are all victims of it." I stared at her. I stared at the woman I had shared a life with for 40 years. She was lying to my face with the ease of a sociopath. The market hadn't crashed. The economy wasn't that bad. The money hadn't vanished into thin air. It had vanished into Dave Consulting LLC. It had vanished into first-class tickets and 5-star resorts. She wasn't just greedy. She was evil. She was willing to let me believe I was destitute due to bad luck rather than admit she had stolen our future. She was watching me closely, waiting to see if I bought it, waiting to see if the old fool would swallow the bait. I lowered my head. I let my shoulders shake slightly as if I were crying. In reality, I was trembling with a rage so pure and hot, it felt like it could burn the house down. "Gone," I whispered. "All of it." "It is for the best, Thomas," she said, reaching across the table to pat my hand again. Her skin felt cold. "Sign the papers, Thomas. Let's just get this over with. If you sign tonight, I promise I will help you find a nice room somewhere. I will even give you a little cash from the house sale to get you started. I am not a monster, Thomas. I still care about you. You care about me." The audacity of it took my breath away. I pulled my hand back. I couldn't stand her touch for another second. I need to lie down," I said, pushing my chair back. The legs scraped loudly against the floor. "I am not feeling well, Victoria. My chest hurts." Her eyes widened slightly. "Hope." I saw hope in them, hope that maybe I would just have a heart attack right there and save her the trouble of the divorce. "Oh dear," she said, standing up but making no move to help me. "Do you need your pills?" "I just need sleep," I said, shuffling towards the hallway. "I am tired, Victoria. So tired." "What about the papers, Thomas?" she called after me. Her voice lost its sweetness. It became sharp again. "You need to sign them. Jonathan is expecting them tomorrow morning." "Tomorrow," I mumbled, not looking back. "We will talk tomorrow. I can't think right now. The market, all that money." I walked up the stairs, slowly gripping the banister like an old man on his deathbed. I heard her sigh loudly in the dining room. I heard the clink of the wine bottle against the glass as she poured herself another drink. "He is useless," she muttered to herself. I reached the top of the stairs and went into the guest bedroom. I had moved my things there the night before. I closed the door and locked it. I leaned against the wood, breathing hard in the darkness. She thought she had won. She thought I was broken. She thought I believed her lie about the market crash. She was downstairs right now, probably texting Dave, probably celebrating the fact that the old man was finally giving up. But she was wrong. I wasn't giving up. I was waiting. I sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the clock. It was 8:30. Too early to do anything. I had to wait until she was asleep. I had to wait until the wine did its work. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out the folded papers Sarah had given me at the bank. I smoothed them out on my lap. In the dim light from the street lamp outside the window, the name Dave Consulting LLC seemed to glow. I am not a violent man. I am a teacher. I believe in rules. I believe in order. But Victoria had broken every rule. She had shattered the order of our lives. And now I was going to use the rules against her. I lay down on the bed, fully clothed. I stared at the ceiling. I listened to the sounds of the house. I heard the television turn on downstairs. I heard the murmur of a reality show. I heard her laugh. Laugh while you can, Victoria, I thought. Laugh while you still have a house to laugh in. I waited. 1 hour, 2 hours, 3. At 11:30, the television turned off. I heard her footsteps on the stairs. They were heavy, a little unsteady. The wine. Good. She went into the master bedroom. The door closed. Then silence. I gave it another hour just to be sure. At 12:30, I sat up. My joints popped. My adrenaline was surging, chasing away the fatigue. It was time. I took off my shoes so I could walk silently in my socks. I opened the door of the guest room. The hallway was dark. I crept towards the stairs. Every creak of the floorboards sounded like a gunshot to my heightened senses, but I kept moving. I went downstairs. The living room was bathed in moonlight. And there it was. Lying on the coffee table right where she had left it was her iPad. Victoria was addicted to that thing. She never went anywhere without it. But the wine had made her careless. She had left it downstairs. I walked over to the table. I picked up the tablet. It was cold and sleek in my hands. I pressed the home button. The screen lit up, illuminating my face in a ghostly blue glow. Enter passcode. I stared at the keypad. I knew Victoria. I knew she was creatures of habit. She wasn't tech-savvy. She wouldn't use a random string of numbers. It would be something meaningful, something she wouldn't forget. I tried our anniversary. Incorrect. I tried her birthday. Incorrect. I paused. Think, Thomas. Think. Who does she love? Who is the center of her world right now? Lucas. I typed in Lucas's birthday. 081282. The padlock icon unlocked. The home screen opened. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. I was in. I didn't waste time. I went straight to the Messages app. And there it was, a thread pinned to the top. The contact name was simply Dave. I tapped on it, and my stomach turned over. Hundreds of messages, photos, plans, mockery. I scrolled back. I read things no husband should ever have to read. He is so pathetic, Dave. He actually believed I was going to church. Cannot wait to be in Cabo with you, baby. Did the transfer go through? Yes, 50,000 sent to the LLC. We are going to buy that condo soon. Just a few more weeks and the old fool will be on the street. I read until my eyes burned. I read until I felt sick, but I didn't stop. I took my own phone out of my pocket and I started taking pictures. I took pictures of every incriminating text, every bank transfer confirmation she had screenshotted, every photo of them together in places where she said she was alone. Then I found something else. An email notification popped up while I was holding the tablet. It was from an insurance company. Subject Policy Update. Thomas Black Life Insurance. I frowned. I didn't have life insurance. I had canceled my policy years ago when the premiums got too high. I clicked on the email app. I opened the message. Dear Mrs. Black, this is to confirm the premium payment for the $2 million term life policy on Mr. Thomas Black. As the sole beneficiary, I stopped reading. The room spun. $2 million. She had taken out a policy on me, recently, without my knowledge. And then I saw the text message to Dave from 2 days ago. Stress is a killer, Dave. He is old. His heart is weak. If he kicks the bucket during this divorce process, I get everything plus the insurance. It would be cleaner that way. She wasn't just waiting for me to die. She was banking on it. She was hoping the stress of the eviction, the poverty, the humiliation would trigger a heart attack. I lowered the tablet. My hands were shaking so hard the image on the screen blurred. I looked up at the ceiling towards the bedroom where she was sleeping. I wasn't just a husband she wanted to leave. I was an investment she wanted to cash out. I took a picture of the insurance email. Then I carefully wiped the screen of the iPad with my sleeve to remove my fingerprints. I placed it back on the coffee table exactly as I had found it. I stood in the dark living room and I felt a transformation take place. The sad, confused old teacher was gone. In his place was a man who had just seen the face of his executioner. I wasn't going to have a heart attack, Victoria, I thought. I am going to live. I am going to live just to watch you fall. I turned and walked to the kitchen. I drank a glass of water. Then I went back to the guest room and locked the door. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. I sat by the window watching the street waiting for the first light of dawn. I had the evidence. I had the motive. I had the weapon. Now I just needed the soldier to fire it. Tomorrow I was going to Chicago. Tomorrow I was going to find Anthony Russo. And tomorrow the war would truly begin. The sun had not yet risen when I slipped out the back door of the house I had built and paid for. The morning air was crisp and damp, carrying the scent of wet pavement and the distant hum of the city waking up. I moved like a thief in my own backyard, avoiding the squeaky floorboard on the porch, stepping over the garden hose Victoria never put away. I had a small canvas messenger bag slung over my shoulder. Inside it were the papers Sarah had given me at the bank, my phone containing the photos of the iPad screen and the 4 $10 bills that represented my entire liquid net worth. I walked 3 blocks to the bus stop, my heart beating a steady rhythm of fear and determination. I was 70 years old, wearing a suit that smelled faintly of mothballs because I couldn't afford dry cleaning. Heading into the belly of downtown Chicago to start a war I had no business fighting. The bus ride was a purgatory of stops and starts. I sat near the back, clutching my bag to my chest. The other passengers were tired workers, night shift nurses, people with hollow eyes who looked like they were barely hanging on. For the first time in my life, I felt like I truly belonged among them. I wasn't the respected history teacher anymore. I wasn't the homeowner in the suburbs. I was just another old man trying to survive a system that wanted to chew him up and spit him out. As the bus merged onto the highway, the skyline of Chicago rose up in the distance, jagged and imposing, against the gray morning sky. Somewhere in that concrete jungle was the office of Russo and Partners. Somewhere in one of those steel towers was the only person on earth who might be crazy enough or loyal enough to help me. I spent the ride rehearsing what I would say. How do you ask a man who charges $1,500 an hour to help you for free? How do you explain to a former student that the teacher who used to lecture him on responsibility and foresight had let his own wife rob him blind? The shame burned in my stomach, hotter than the acid reflux I had been battling for days. The bus dropped me off 2 blocks from the financial district. I walked the rest of the way, my old dress shoes pinching my toes with every step. The wind whipping off Lake Michigan was brutal, cutting through my thin jacket, but I didn't button it up. I needed to look presentable. I needed to look like I belonged, even though my reflection in the shop windows told a different story. I looked gray. I looked defeated. I stopped in front of the building. It was a monolith of glass and steel that seemed to pierce the clouds. The name of the firm wasn't even on the outside. Places like this didn't need to advertise to people walking on the sidewalk. You either knew you belonged there or you didn't. I pushed through the revolving doors and stepped into a lobby that was larger than my entire house. The floor was polished marble that reflected the recessed lighting like a frozen lake. The air smelled of expensive coffee and fresh lilies. Men and women in sharp suits walked with purpose, talking into earpieces, carrying leather briefcases that probably cost more than my car. I approached the security desk. A large man in a uniform that looked too tight around the neck stared at me. He didn't smile. He looked at my shoes first, then my frayed cuffs, then my face. He had already made his assessment. "Can I help you, sir?" he asked, his tone suggesting that he very much doubted he could. "I am here to see Anthony Russo," I said, trying to project the authority I used to have in the classroom. My voice sounded thin in the cavernous space. "Do you have an appointment?" the guard asked, not bothering to look at the computer screen. "No," I said. "But it is urgent. I am an old friend, a teacher of his." The guard sighed, a heavy sound of impatience. "Mr. Russo does not see walk-ins, sir, and he certainly does not see people without appointments. You need to call his assistant and schedule a consultation." "I cannot call," I said, leaning closer. "Please, just call up. Tell him Thomas Black is here. Mr. Black. He will know." The guard shook his head, his hand moving towards his belt. Not to a weapon, but to a radio. He was getting ready to have me removed. "Sir, I am going to have to ask you to leave. This is a private building. You are loitering." I felt the panic rising. I couldn't leave. If I walked out those doors, it was over. Victoria won. Ashford won. Dave won. "I am not loitering," I insisted, my voice rising slightly. "I just need 5 minutes. Just tell him I am here." "Sir, step back," the guard said, stepping out from behind the desk. He was a foot taller than me. I looked around desperately. People were staring. A group of lawyers near the elevators were whispering and looking at the crazy old man making a scene. I felt the heat of humiliation crawling up my neck. I was about to be thrown out on the street like a beggar. And then the elevator doors at the far end of the lobby chimed. A group of people spilled out. Reporters, cameras, flashes of light popping in the dim lobby. In the center of the storm was a man. He was tall, with salt and pepper hair cut with surgical precision. He wore a charcoal suit that fit him like a second skin. He was moving fast, ignoring the microphones thrust in his face, his expression one of bored intensity. It was him. Older, harder, richer, but it was him. "Anthony," I shouted. The sound tore out of my throat before I could stop it. It was undignified. It was desperate. The guard grabbed my arm. "Okay, that is enough. Let's go." But the man in the charcoal suit had stopped. He stopped mid-stride, causing the reporters to stumble into each other. He turned his head, scanning the lobby with sharp, predatory eyes. His gaze swept over the security desk, over the guard, and landed on me. For a second, there was no recognition, just a blank stare. And I thought, he doesn't know me. It's been 30 years. I am just a ghost. Then his eyes widened. The professional mask cracked. "Mr. Black," he said. He shoved a microphone away from his face with a force that surprised the reporter holding it. He stepped out of the circle of media, walking towards the security desk. His stride was long and purposeful. The guard froze, his hand still gripping my arm. "Mr. Russo, I am handling this. This individual was causing a disturbance." Anthony Russo didn't even look at the guard. He looked at the hand on my arm. "Get your hand off him," Anthony said. His voice was low, but it carried a menace that made the guard snatch his hand back as if he had touched a hot stove. Anthony looked at me. He looked at my frayed collar. He looked at the desperation in my eyes. He looked at the way I was clutching my messenger bag. "Mr. Black," he said. Again, touched softer this time. "Thomas." "Hello, Anthony," I said, my voice trembling. I didn't know where else to go. Anthony Russo, the shark of Chicago, the man who destroyed CEOs and politicians for breakfast, did something that made the entire lobby go silent. He stepped forward and wrapped me in a bear hug. He hugged me tight, unconcerned about his expensive suit, unconcerned about the cameras. "I thought you were dead," he whispered into my ear. "I heard you retired years ago." "I am not dead," I whispered back, fighting the tears that threatened to spill over. "Not yet. But they are trying, Anthony. They are trying to kill me." He pulled back and held me by the shoulders. He looked into my face, really looked at me with the same intensity he used to have when he was a troubled kid trying to figure out if he could trust me. He saw the fear. He saw the exhaustion. "Who is trying?" he asked. "My wife," I said. "And her lawyer." "Jonathan Ashford." Anthony's eyes narrowed. The warmth vanished, replaced by a cold, hard glint that terrified me and comforted me at the same time. "Ashford," he repeated. He put his arm around my shoulder and turned to the guard who was now looking at his shoes. "This man is my guest," Anthony said, his voice projecting to everyone in the room. "He has a standing appointment. Forever. If he ever comes in here again and you stop him, you will be looking for a job at the mall. Do you understand?" "Yes, Mr. Russo." "Sorry, Mr. Russo." Anthony guided me towards the elevators, his arm heavy and protective around my shoulders. The reporters started shouting questions again. "Mr. Russo, who is this? Is this related to the merger case?" Anthony ignored them all. He pressed the button for the penthouse floor. The doors slid shut, cutting off the noise of the lobby, cutting off the world that had tried to discard me. We stood in the silence of the rising elevator. Anthony looked at me. "You look like hell, Mr. Black," he said bluntly. "I feel like hell, Anthony," I admitted. He nodded. "Come upstairs. I have the good coffee. And then you are going to tell me exactly why Jonathan Ashford is trying to kill my favorite teacher. And then..." He smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was a shark's smile. "And then we are going to bury him." The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime that sounded like a bell signaling the start of a new round in a boxing match. We stepped out into a reception area that was larger than the entire ground floor of my house. The carpet was thick and plush, swallowing the sound of my worn-out shoes. The walls were lined with modern art that probably cost more than a teacher's annual salary. It was a world of power, silence, and money. A world I had never belonged to, but one that Anthony Russo now ruled. Anthony guided me past a line of gaping paralegals and junior associates. He didn't stop to explain why he was escorting a disheveled old man into the inner sanctum. He just marched straight to a set of double mahogany doors at the end of the hall. He pushed them open and ushered me inside. His private office was breathtaking. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of Lake Michigan and the Chicago skyline. It was a view reserved for the masters of the universe. He gestured for me to sit on a tufted leather sofa that felt like sinking into a cloud. "Sit, Mr. Black," he said, loosening his tie and throwing his suit jacket onto a chair. "I will get us that coffee." He didn't buzz an assistant. He walked over to a sleek bar in the corner and started working a complicated espresso machine himself. The domesticity of the action performed by a man who charged a fortune for his time made a lump form in my throat. While his back was turned, I looked around. On the wall behind his massive desk, there were diplomas from Ivy League schools and awards for legal excellence. But on a small shelf near the window, I saw something that made my heart ache. It was a framed photo of a much younger Anthony, skinny and defiant, standing next to me at his high school graduation. I was handing him his diploma. I had forgotten that photo existed. He hadn't. "Here," Anthony said, placing a steaming ceramic cup on the low table in front of me. "Black, 2 sugars. Just how you used to drink it in the teacher's lounge, when you let me sit there to avoid the bullies." I took the cup. The warmth seeped into my cold fingers. "Thank you, Anthony." He sat down in the armchair opposite me, leaning forward, his elbows on his knees. The shark of Chicago was gone. In his place was the intense, intelligent boy I had known 30 years ago. "Talk to me, Thomas," he said softly, "and do not leave anything out." I took a sip of the coffee. It was rich and strong, bolstering my courage. And then I let it all out. I told him about the birthday cake crushed under the divorce papers. I told him about Victoria's cruel ultimatum. I told him about Lucas standing in my living room, looking at the walls like he was calculating their resale value and telling me to die quickly so he could get his inheritance. Anthony listened without interrupting. His face was unreadable, but his eyes grew darker with every sentence. When I told him about the walk to the bank and Sarah's discovery, his jaw tightened. She drained the accounts, he asked, his voice low and dangerous. Everything I said setting the coffee cup down because my hands had started shaking again. $400,000. Gone. Funneled into a shell company called Dave Consulting. I reached into my canvas bag and pulled out the crumpled printouts Sarah had given me. I smoothed them out on the coffee table. "And there is more," I whispered. "Last night." I broke into her iPad. Anthony raised an eyebrow, a flicker of a smile touching his lips. "You hacked her tablet?" I guessed the passcode, I admitted, feeling a flush of shame and pride. "It was Lucas's birthday. I found messages, Anthony. Thousands of them. Dave isn't a consultant. He is her personal trainer. He is 45 years old. She has been paying for his apartment, his car, their vacations, all with my retirement money." I pulled out my phone and opened the gallery. I handed it to him. "Look at the last photo," I said. Anthony took the phone. He swiped through the screenshots of the text messages, his expression hardening into a mask of cold fury. Then he stopped. He was looking at the screenshot of the life insurance email. $2 million, he read aloud. "Sole beneficiary Victoria Black." He looked up at me and the look in his eyes was terrifying. It wasn't pity. It was the look of a man who had just decided to burn a village to the ground. "She took this out 2 months ago," he said. "Yes," I replied. "And in the texts, she told Dave that she hoped the stress of the divorce would kill me. She is betting on my heart giving out Anthony. She wants the house, the pension, and the insurance payout. She wants the trifecta." Anthony stood up. He walked to the window and looked out at the city he conquered. He stood there for a long time, silent as a statue. When he turned back to me, he was buttoning his cuffs. The transformation was complete. The student was gone. The shark had arrived. "Mr. Black," he said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming smooth and lethal. "Do you know why I became a divorce lawyer?" I shook my head. "Because people think family law is about love," he said, walking back to the table. But it isn't. It is about war. It is about power. And bullies like your wife and her lawyer Jonathan Ashford think they have all the power because they have no shame. He picked up the papers from the table and held them up. This is not just evidence of adultery. This is fraud. This is dissipation of marital assets. This is financial abuse of an elder. And that insurance policy, that is intent. He tossed the papers back onto the table. Jonathan Ashford thinks he is going to walk into court and bully a defenseless old teacher. He thinks he is going to steamroll you because you don't have the money to fight back. Anthony walked over to his desk and pressed a button on his intercom. Jessica, clear my schedule for the week. Cancel the merger meeting. Cancel the lunch with the senator. But Mr. Russo, the voice on the intercom, protested. The merger is worth, I don't care what it is worth, Anthony barked. Clear it, and get the forensic accounting team in the conference room in 10 minutes. I want the private investigators there too. Get me everything we have on Jonathan Ashford. Every dirty trick he has pulled in the last 10 years. And order lunch. We are going to be here a while. He released the button and looked at me. You are not paying me a dime, Thomas. Do not insult me by offering. You saved my life when I was 15. You gave me a future. Now I am going to give you yours back. He walked over and extended his hand. We are not just going to win this case, Mr. Black. We are going to dismantle her. We are going to find every penny she stole. We are going to expose her boyfriend. And we are going to make sure that by the time we are done, Jonathan Ashford wishes he had never learned to read. I stood up and took his hand. His grip was iron. For the first time in 3 days, the crushing weight on my chest lightened. I wasn't the old man with the cane anymore. I was the general's advisor. Thank you, Anthony, I said, my voice steady. Don't thank me yet, he said, opening the door to the conference room where his team was already gathering. Thank me when she is standing in front of the judge realizing she has lost everything. He gestured for me to follow him. Come on, Mr. Black. Class is in session. I sat there holding the ceramic mug with both hands, letting the heat seep into my cold palms, while the steam rose up and fogged my glasses. It was the best coffee I had tasted in years, rich and dark, but I could barely swallow past the lump in my throat. Across from me, Anthony Russo sat on the edge of his desk. He was not looking at the skyline anymore. He was looking at me with an expression that bridged the gap of 3 decades. Do you remember the spring of 1992? Mr. Black, Anthony asked, his voice quiet and reflective. I nodded slowly. I remembered it well. It was the year the budget cuts hit the district. It was the year the gang violence spiked. I was 16 years old. Anthony continued staring into his own coffee cup as if reading the future in the dark liquid. I was angry. My father had just left us. My mother was working double shifts. I had no money for new clothes, so I fought. I fought everyone. I fought the teachers. I fought the other students. And then I got caught breaking into the vending machines in the cafeteria. He looked up at me, a small, sad smile touching his lips. The police were there in 10 minutes. They had the handcuffs out. They were ready to process me into the system. 1 strike and you are out. That was the policy. I was heading straight for juvenile detention, and from there, probably prison. My life was over before it had even started. I remembered that afternoon vividly. I remembered the look of terrified defiance in the boy's eyes. I remembered the way the officers had handled him like he was already a criminal. But you stepped in, Anthony said. You walked right out of your classroom in the middle of a lesson. You stood between me and that officer. You told him that if he took me in, he would have to arrest you too because you had sent me to get a snack. It was a lie. A blatant lie. But you said it with such authority that they backed down. You paid for the broken glass out of your own pocket. Anthony said, his voice thickening with emotion. You stayed after school with me every single day for the rest of that year. You taught me history, yes, but you taught me logic. You taught me how to argue with words instead of fists. You told me that the law was just a system of rules, and if I learned the rules, I could win the game. He stood up and walked over to the shelf, picking up the framed photo of his graduation. You saved my life, Thomas. That is not a figure of speech. You literally saved my life. I would be dead or in a cell if not for you. I lowered my eyes, feeling the heat rise in my cheeks. You were a good kid, Anthony, I whispered. You just needed someone to see it. And now you need someone to see you, he replied firmly, putting the photo back. He walked back to the leather chair opposite me and sat down. The nostalgia vanished from his face, replaced by a laser-focused intensity. He held out his hand. Give them to me. My hands were shaking so bad the papers rustled loudly as I pulled them from my bag. I handed him the court summons first, the thick packet that Jonathan Ashford had drafted with such cruel precision. Then I handed him the crumpled printouts from the bank, the ones Sarah had risked her job to give me. Anthony took them. He put on a pair of reading glasses that made him look even more dangerous, like a surgeon preparing to cut. The room went silent except for the rustle of paper and the soft hum of the air conditioning. I watched his face. At first, his expression was neutral, professional. He scanned the divorce petition, his eyes moving rapidly over the legal jargon. But then he stopped. He reread a paragraph. His jaw tightened. The muscles in his neck stood out. 70%, he muttered under his breath. He wants 70% of the pension. And he is claiming spousal support based on lost potential earnings. He flipped the page. He is citing your age as a factor for incompetency, he said, his voice dropping to a low growl. He is trying to lay the groundwork for a guardianship. They do not just want to divorce you, Thomas. They want to control you. They want to take away your legal right to make decisions for yourself. He tossed the divorce papers onto the table with a look of pure disgust and picked up the bank statements. This was the moment I had been waiting for. This was the smoking gun. He scanned the rows of numbers. He saw the withdrawals. He saw the transfers. Dave Consulting LLC, he read aloud. He looked at the screenshots I had printed of the text messages. He looked at the photos of Victoria and Dave in Cabo. He looked at the life insurance policy. The transformation in his face was terrifying to behold. The warmth he had shown me earlier evaporated completely. In its place was a cold, hard rage that seemed to lower the temperature in the room. His eyes narrowed into slits. His lips pressed into a thin white line. He looked like a shark that had just smelled blood in the water. This isn't just a divorce case, he said, his voice quiet but vibrating with intensity. This is a crime scene. He looked up at me and I saw something in his eyes that I had only ever seen in soldiers before a battle. It was a promise of violence. Not physical violence, but legal violence. Do you know who Jonathan Ashford is? He asked. I shook my head. I know he is expensive. I know Victoria thinks he is a god. He is a parasite, Anthony said, spitting the word out. We went to law school together. He was the guy who cheated on his ethics exams. He has made a career out of bullying people who cannot fight back. He hides assets. He intimidates witnesses. He plays dirty because he isn't smart enough to win fair. Anthony stood up and paced the room, the papers clutched in his hand like a weapon. He humiliated a client of mine 5 years ago. A good woman. He dragged her name through the mud, destroyed her relationship with her children, just to win a few extra points on the settlement. I swore then that if I ever got him in my sights again, I would not just beat him. I would end him. He stopped pacing and turned to me. He slammed the papers down on the desk. He made a mistake, Thomas. A fatal mistake. He thought you were alone. He thought you were just a retired teacher with no resources. He didn't do his homework. He didn't know who your students were. Anthony walked over to me and placed both hands on the arms of my chair, leaning in close. I am going to take this case, and I am not going to charge you a single penny. Not for my time, not for my team, not for the filing fees, nothing. But Anthony, I protested, weak with relief but still proud. This will cost thousands. I cannot let you. It is already paid for, he interrupted, his voice fierce. You paid for it 30 years ago when you stood in front of that police officer. This is a debt of honor, Mr. Black, and the Russo family always pays its debts. He straightened up and buttoned his jacket. He looked like a general rallying his troops. We are going to audit every cent she spent. We are going to subpoena this Dave character. We are going to freeze her assets so fast her head will spin. And Jonathan Ashford. Anthony smiled. It was the shark's smile again, terrifying and predatory. I am going to destroy his reputation. I am going to expose every dirty trick he pulls. By the time we walk out of that courtroom, he will be begging for mercy. He walked over to his desk and hit the intercom button again. Send them in, he commanded. The double doors opened and 5 people walked in. They were young, sharp, and hungry looking. They carried laptops and files. They looked like a special ops team in business casual. This is the team, Anthony said, gesturing to them. They are the best forensic accountants and investigators in Chicago. And as of this moment, they work for you. He turned back to me, his eyes shining with a fierce loyalty. Drink your coffee, Thomas. Rest. The cavalry has arrived, and we are going to make them pay for every tear you shed. I sat in the corner of what Anthony called the war room, watching a scene that looked more like a military operation than a legal consultation. The conference table was covered in laptops, monitors, and stacks of documents. The air was thick with the smell of coffee and the quiet hum of hard drives. The 5 young associates Anthony had summoned were working with a terrifying efficiency. They typed in bursts of staccato rhythm, their eyes scanning lines of code and bank ledgers that were projected onto a massive screen at the front of the room. I felt like a ghost haunting my own life. These strangers were dissecting 40 years of my history. Every check I had written, every deposit I had made, every dollar I had saved was being pulled apart and examined under a microscope. It was necessary, I knew that, but it felt invasive. It felt like an autopsy of my marriage performed while I was still alive to watch. Anthony paced at the front of the room like a conductor orchestrating a symphony of vengeance. He barked orders and pointed at the screen where a complex web of transactions was beginning to take shape. Follow the money, he commanded. She is arrogant. She thinks she is smart, but she is sloppy. Arrogant people always leave a trail. Find it. A young woman with glasses sitting at the center of the table looked up. Her name was Sarah, not the Sarah from the bank, but a forensic accountant who looked like she could find a missing penny in a haystack. I have got something, Mr. Russo, she said, her voice calm and professional. We traced the wire transfers to Dave Consulting LLC. It is a shell company registered in Delaware. No employees, no physical office, just a P.O. box. And the money, Anthony asked, leaning over her shoulder. Where did it go from there? Sarah tapped a few keys and a new graphic appeared on the screen. It looked like a spider web. It moved fast, she explained. Within 24 hours of hitting the LLC account, the funds were dispersed. Most of it went to pay off credit card debt in the name of David Miller. But the bulk of it, about $200,000, was used as a down payment on a property. A property? I asked, my voice trembling. Yes, Mr. Black, Sarah said, turning to look at me with sympathy. A luxury condominium in the River North District, 2 bedrooms, lake view. The deed is in David Miller's name, but the money came directly from your retirement savings. I stared at the screen. River North. It was one of the most expensive neighborhoods in Chicago, a place where young professionals lived, a place where people drank craft cocktails and went to art galleries. Victoria had bought her lover a bachelor pad with the money I had set aside for our nursing home care. She had literally built a new life for him on the ashes of mine. Anthony slammed his fist onto the table, making everyone jump. Dissipation of assets, he growled. Fraud. Constructive trust. We are going to put a lien on that condo so fast his head will spin. He won't be able to flush the toilet without my permission. He turned to the private investigator, a man named Mike who was sitting quietly in the back. What do you have on Dave? Mike opened a folder. David Miller, 45 years old. Personal trainer at the Equinox Gym where Mrs. Black has a membership. He has a record, Anthony. 2 bankruptcies. A restraining order from an ex-girlfriend 3 years ago. He owes 40 grand in back taxes. He was looking for a sugar mama, and he found one. I felt a wave of nausea. This was the man she chose. This was the man she destroyed our family for. A grifter. A loser who preyed on lonely older women. But there was more. I could feel it in the room. The energy had shifted. Sarah was looking at her screen again, and she had stopped typing. She was staring at a specific line item, her face pale. She looked up at Anthony and gave a microscopic shake of her head. What is it? Anthony asked, stepping closer to her. What did you find? Sarah hesitated. She looked at me, then back at Anthony. Mr. Russo, maybe we should discuss this in private, she whispered. No, Anthony said, his voice firm. Mr. Black has a right to know everything. We do not keep secrets here. Put it on the screen, Sarah. She typed a command, and a new transaction highlighted in red appeared on the main monitor. It was a wire transfer dated 3 months ago. The amount was $20,000. It came from the joint checking account, the one Victoria controlled. But it didn't go to Dave Consulting. It went to a personal checking account. The recipient name was printed clearly in bold letters. Lucas Black. The room went silent. The air seemed to be sucked out of the space, leaving a vacuum that crushed my chest. I stared at the name. My son's name. $20,000. Why, I whispered. Why did she send him $20,000? Sarah looked down at her notes, avoiding my eyes. The memo line on the check says gift, she said softly. But Mr. Black, we cross-referenced the date. This transfer happened 2 days after you discovered the first discrepancy in the credit card statement. 2 days after you asked her about the hotel charge in Jackson. I closed my eyes. The pieces fell into place with a sickening click. That was why Lucas had been so cold. That was why he had stood in my living room and told me to die. He wasn't just siding with his mother because she was the fun one. He was on the payroll. She had paid him off. She had bought his silence. She had given him $20,000 of my money to look the other way while she robbed me blind. She had turned my own son into an accomplice. The pain was physical. It felt like a serrated knife twisting in my gut. I bent forward, putting my head in my hands. A sound escaped my throat, a low moan of pure agony that I couldn't suppress. Losing the money was one thing. Losing my wife was another. But this was a betrayal so deep it felt like it severed my soul. My son, my boy. The boy I had taught to fish. The boy I had sat up with when he had a fever. He had sold me for $20,000. That was what I was worth to him. The price of a used car. I felt a hand on my shoulder. It wasn't the tentative touch of a stranger. It was a firm, grounding grip. Thomas, look at me. I raised my head. Anthony was crouching next to my chair so he could look me in the eye. His face was hard, but his eyes were filled with a fierce compassion. This hurts, I know, he said, his voice low and intense. It feels like you lost him. It feels like you failed him. I did fail him, I choked out, tears streaming down my face. I must have failed him, Anthony. How could I raise a son who would do this? How could I raise a son who would sell his own father? Anthony shook his head. He squeezed my shoulder harder. Listen to me, Thomas. You did not fail him. You loved him. You provided for him. You protected him. That is what a father does. What he became, that is on him. That is his choice, his greed, his weakness. He leaned closer, his dark eyes locking onto mine. You are grieving the loss of your son, Thomas, but you need to understand something very important. You did not lose a son today. You just finally realized that you never really had him. The boy you loved, the boy you thought he does not exist. He is a projection of your own goodness. The man who took that money, that is who he really is, and he is not worth one single tear from a man like you. I stared at him. The words were harsh, brutal even, but they were true. They cut through the fog of my pain like a scalpel removing a tumor. I had been mourning a fiction. I had been holding on to a memory of a child who had long ago grown into a stranger. Anthony stood up and turned to the room. We have everything we need, he announced, his voice ringing with authority. We have the fraud. We have the adultery. We have the conspiracy. And now we have the accomplice. He turned back to the screen and pointed at Lucas's name. Add him to the complaint. We are going to depose him too. If he wants to play in the mud with his mother, he is going to get dirty. He looked at me again. Are you ready, Thomas? Because now we have the ammunition to end this war before it even starts. I wiped my face with my handkerchief. I took a deep breath. The pain was still there, a dull ache in my chest, but the shock was fading. In its place was a cold clarity. I stood up. My knees were steady. I am ready, Anthony, I said. Do what you have to do. Anthony nodded. He turned to his team. Draft the motions, freeze the accounts, subpoena the records, and get a process server ready. We are going to serve them all. Victoria, Dave, and Lucas. He checked his watch. It is 5:00. By tomorrow morning, their world is going to be on fire. I looked at the screen one last time at the name Lucas Black glowing in the digital light. I said a silent goodbye to the little boy I used to know. Then I turned my back on the screen and looked at Anthony. Let's go get them, I said. 2 days before the court date, the sky over Chicago was the color of a bruised plum. It was raining a cold, persistent drizzle that tapped against the windows of my empty house like 1,000 tiny fingers asking to be let in. I was sitting in my study, the room where I used to grade papers and plan lessons, but which now felt like a waiting room for the executioner. Anthony had warned me they would come. He had told me exactly what they would do. They are going to try to break you, Thomas. He had said, his voice calm and certain over the phone. They know the court date is approaching. They know they have to lock this down before a judge sees the financials. They will come with threats. They will come with insults. And you have to take it. You have to be the scared old man they think you are. Can you do that? I had told him yes. But sitting there listening to the rain, I wasn't sure. The anger inside me was a living thing now, a hot coal burning in my chest. I didn't want to play the victim. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw them out. But I trusted Anthony. I trusted the plan. At 6:00, the doorbell rang. It wasn't a polite chime. It was a heavy, insistent pounding. I took a deep breath, took off my glasses, and rubbed my eyes to make them look red and watery. I hunched my shoulders, letting my spine curve into the posture of the defeated. I practiced a tremor in my right hand. Then I shuffled to the door. I opened it, and there they were. The unholy trinity. Victoria stood in the center wearing a raincoat that looked brand new and clutching a designer handbag. To her left was Jonathan Ashford, slick and predatory in a pinstripe suit that cost more than my first car. And to her right, avoiding my gaze, was Lucas. My son, the accomplice. Thomas, Victoria said, pushing past me without waiting for an invitation. It is wet out here. Move aside. She marched into the living room, her heels clicking on the hardwood. Ashford followed his eyes, scanning the house with the appraisal of a butcher eyeing a carcass. Lucas trailed behind, dragging his feet like a reluctant teenager. "We need to talk, Mr. Black," Ashford said, his voice smooth and oily. "Or rather, we need to finish this." I closed the door and turned to face them. I kept my head down, my eyes darting nervously between them. I thought we were going to court," I stammered, letting my voice crack. On Thursday." Ashford laughed. It was a short, barking sound. "Court is expensive, Mr. Black, and frankly it is unnecessary. We are here to offer you a mercy kill, a final settlement." He walked over to this coffee table and opened his briefcase. He pulled out a document thick and stapled with a blue cover. He slapped it down on the table. "This is it," he said. "The final offer. We are feeling generous today, Thomas. If you sign this right now, we will let you keep the Buick." The Buick. My 10-year-old car with rust on the wheel wells. They were offering me my own car as if it were a prize. But the house, I whispered, gripping the back of a chair for support. And my pension. "Gone," Ashford said, his face hardening. "The house is Victoria's. The pension is compensation for the years of emotional distress you caused her. If we go to court, Mr. Black, I promise you the judge will not be as kind as we are. I will bring up your mental state. I will bring up the incidents of aggression Victoria has documented. You will lose everything. You will lose the car. You will lose your dignity. You will spend the rest of your life in a state-run facility eating mush with a plastic spoon." I looked at Victoria. She was watching me with a look of pure triumph. "Just sign it, Thomas," she said, her voice dripping with false pity. "Do not be stubborn. You are old. You are confused. You cannot handle a trial. Look at you. You are shaking." I looked down at my hands. I was shaking, but not from fear. I was shaking from the effort of not lunging at her, Lucas. I said, turning to my son, "Please, talk to them. This isn't right." Lucas finally looked at me. His eyes were cold, empty windows. "Dad, just do it," he said, his voice flat. "Mom deserves the money. You don't need it. Just sign the paper and let us move on. It is embarrassing watching you beg." Embarrassing. My son found my destruction embarrassing. "Okay," I whispered, letting my shoulders slump completely. "Okay. I don't want to go to court. I don't want any trouble." "Excellent," Ashford said, uncapping a heavy fountain pen. He pointed to the signature line on the last page. "Right here. Press hard. It is a triplicate." I walked to the table. I moved slowly, shuffling my feet. I sat down on the sofa. I picked up the pen. It felt heavy in my hand. Can I read it first?" I asked, looking up at Ashford over the rim of my glasses. "There is no time," Ashford snapped, checking his watch. "It is standard legal boilerplate. You keep the car, Victoria gets the rest. We have been over this. Sign it, Thomas, unless you want to walk to the homeless shelter." I looked at the paper. The words swam before my eyes. Marital settlement agreement. Irrevocable. I knew what I had to do. Anthony had given me a specific instruction. "Do not sign the actual document, Thomas. Sign anything else. A napkin, a grocery list, a draft. Just make them think you signed it." I fumbled with the papers. I acted clumsy, my hands shaking violently. I knocked the document onto the floor. Oh dear," I stammered, bending down to pick it up. "I am so sorry. My hands. They aren't what they used to be." In the confusion of gathering the papers, I pulled a sheet from underneath the coffee table where I had taped it earlier. It was a blank piece of paper with a single line of typed text at the top that read "Receipt of Draft." It looked official enough at a glance. I shuffled the stack, putting the blank sheet on top of the signature page covering the real text. I placed it back on the table. Ashford was sighing loudly, tapping his foot. Victoria was rolling her eyes. "Just sign the damn thing, Thomas," she hissed. I put the pen to the paper. I wrote my name. Thomas Black. I made the signature shaky, weak, barely legible. "There," I said, dropping the pen. "It is done." Ashford snatched the papers from the table before the ink was even dry. He didn't check the page. He didn't look to see if I had signed the actual legal document. He just saw a signature on a piece of paper and assumed he had won. He assumed I was too stupid to trick him. He stuffed the papers into his briefcase and snapped it shut. "Smart choice, Mr. Black," he said, smirking. "You saved yourself a lot of pain." Victoria stood up, smoothing her coat. She looked at me one last time. There was no love in her eyes, no gratitude for the 40 years I had given her. There was only disgust. She turned to Lucas. "Look at your father," she said, her voice loud and clear in the quiet room. "Look at him, Lucas. He is pathetic. He folded like a cheap suit. Remember this. Never be weak like him." Lucas nodded, looking at me with a sneer. "Yeah, Mom, I know. Let's go, I have dinner reservations." They walked to the door. Ashford, Victoria, and Lucas. They walked out of my house with a bounce in their step, thinking they had stripped me clean, thinking they had won the war without firing a shot. I heard the car doors slam. I heard the engine start. I heard them drive away laughing. I sat there for a moment in the silence. Then I stood up. I walked to the door and locked it. I threw the deadbolt. I straightened my back. The tremor in my hand vanished. I walked to the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water. I drank it in one long, cool gulp. They thought I was pathetic. They thought I was weak. They thought they had a signed agreement. What they had was a piece of scrap paper and a false sense of security. I picked up the phone and dialed Anthony's number. He answered on the first ring. "It is done," I said, my voice steady and strong. "They took the bait, Anthony. They think it is over." "Good," Anthony said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. "Get some sleep, Thomas. Put on your best suit tomorrow. Because when we walk into that courtroom in 48 hours, we are going to burn their world to the ground." I hung up the phone. I looked around my empty house. It didn't feel like a prison anymore. It felt like a fortress. And I was the commander waiting for dawn. The air in courtroom 4B smelled of floor wax and old wood and the stale anxiety of 1,000 broken marriages that had ended within these walls. I stood alone at the defendant's table, my hands clasped in front of me to hide the slight tremor that still lingered in my fingers. I was wearing my best suit, the charcoal one I had bought with the advance money, but I had deliberately left the jacket unbuttoned and scuffed the shoes slightly to maintain the illusion of the defeated old man one last time. Across the aisle, Victoria sat next to Jonathan Ashford. She looked radiant. She was wearing a cream-colored suit that screamed wealth and innocence, and she was chatting animatedly with Ashford, who looked bored and confident, checking his expensive watch every 30 seconds. "All rise," the bailiff announced, and Judge Harrison swept into the room. He was a stern man, with a reputation for moving cases along quickly. He sat down, adjusted his glasses, and looked at the docket. "Case number 492 Black versus Black," he read, his voice monotone. Ashford stood up immediately, buttoning his jacket with a flourish. "Ready for the petitioner, Your Honor, Jonathan Ashford, representing Mrs. Victoria Black." The judge nodded and turned his gaze to me. He looked over his spectacles, his eyes scanning the empty chair beside me and the lack of paperwork on my table. He sighed, the heavy sigh of a man who hates delays. "Mr. Black, I see no counsel of record for you. Are you representing yourself today?" I opened my mouth to speak, but before I could get a word out, Victoria leaned over to Ashford. Her whisper was a hiss meant to carry. "He does not have a lawyer," she said, her voice dripping with amusement. He cannot afford one. He is just a retired teacher. He is going to beg for mercy." Ashford smirked and did not bother to hush her. He looked at me with pity. "Your Honor, if I may," Ashford said, standing up. "Mr. Black is unrepresented because of financial constraints. However, we believe we have reached a settlement agreement outside of court, which Mr. Black signed 2 days ago. We would like to submit it for the court's approval and save everyone some time." The judge looked at me. "Is this true, Mr. Black? Did you sign a settlement agreement?" I cleared my throat. I looked at Victoria. She was beaming at me, a predator looking at a trapped rabbit. "Actually, Your Honor," I began, my voice quiet but steady, "I did not sign a settlement, and I am not unrepresented." Victoria frowned, confusion clouding her perfect face. Ashford looked annoyed. Mr. Black, the judge, said, his patience thinning, "If you have counsel, they should be here. I do not have time for games." I checked the clock on the wall. It was exactly 9 a.m. "He is here," I said. As if on cue, the heavy double doors at the back of the courtroom swung open with a resounding boom that made the bailiff jump. The sound echoed through the high-ceilinged room, silencing the murmurs in the gallery. Every head turned. Anthony Russo walked in. He did not walk in alone. He was flanked by 3 junior associates who marched in lockstep behind him, each carrying heavy banker's boxes, overflowing with files. Anthony looked magnificent. He was wearing a 3-piece suit that was cut sharper than a razor blade. He moved with a kinetic energy that seemed to suck the oxygen out of the room. He didn't look like a lawyer. He looked like a force of nature. He strode down the center aisle, his heels clicking rhythmically on the floor. He ignored the gallery. He ignored the bailiff. He walked straight to my table, put his briefcase down, and placed a hand on my shoulder. "Anthony Russo for the respondent, Mr. Thomas Black." "Your Honor," Anthony announced, his voice projecting to the back row without effort. "My apologies for the dramatic entrance. We were just collecting the final pieces of evidence from the forensic audit." The reaction at the petitioner's table was immediate and visceral. Jonathan Ashford stopped smiling. The blood drained from his face so fast it looked like a magic trick. His jaw went slack, and his eyes bulged as he stared at Anthony. He knew exactly who had just walked into the room. He knew that the Shark of Chicago had just swum into his wading pool. Victoria, however, was oblivious. She looked at Anthony, then at Ashford, tugging on his sleeve. "Who is that?" she asked loudly, her voice shrill with irritation. "Why is he here? You said Thomas had no money." Ashford leaned toward her, but he couldn't take his eyes off Anthony. He whispered, but in the silence of the room I heard every word. "That is Anthony Russo," he hissed. "So what?" Victoria snapped. "Is he good?" Ashford turned to look at her, and the fear in his eyes was genuine. "Good," Ashford whispered. "Victoria, that man has not lost a divorce case in 10 years. He represents senators. He represents CEOs. His retainer is $50,000 just to say hello. You told me your husband was broke. You told me he was a nobody." "He is broke," Victoria insisted, her voice rising in panic. "I emptied the accounts myself. There is no way he can afford this." Anthony ignored them. He was busy setting up. His associates were unpacking the boxes, stacking binders thick with documents on the table. They set up a laptop and connected it to the courtroom's projector system. It was a display of overwhelming force. Judge Harrison looked over his glasses, his interest piqued. "Mr. Russo," he said, "I was not aware you were taking this case. Mr. Ashford here claims there is a signed settlement." Anthony laughed. It was a cold, dry sound that chilled the air. "Mr. Ashford claims a lot of things, Your Honor," Anthony said, walking toward the bench. "But if he actually looked at the paper my client signed 2 days ago, he would see that it is merely a receipt acknowledging that he received a draft. It is not a settlement. It is not an agreement. And it is certainly not a surrender." Ashford scrambled through his briefcase, pulling out the document I had signed. He flipped to the back page. He stared at the signature. Then he stared at the header of the blank page I had taped over the real document. Receipt of draft. He crumpled the paper in his hand, his face turning a shade of purple. "He tricked me," Ashford sputtered. "He acted like he was senile. He acted like a man under duress," Anthony countered, his voice sharpening, which he was. "But that is the least of your problems, counsel." Anthony turned to face the room. He looked at Victoria. For the first time, she looked truly afraid. She shrank back in her chair, clutching her pearls. "Your Honor," Anthony said, his voice ringing out. "We are not here to negotiate a settlement. We are not here to discuss alimony. We are here to prove that for the last 6 months, Mrs. Victoria Black has been engaged in a systematic and criminal enterprise to defraud her husband." "Objection!" Ashford shouted, standing up, but his voice was shaky. "This is a divorce hearing, not a criminal trial. It is about to become both," Anthony roared back, spinning on his heel to face Ashford. "We are filing a counter-petition for divorce on the grounds of adultery, fraud, and dissipation of marital assets." Anthony walked back to our table and picked up a thick binder. He held it up for the judge to see. "We have evidence, Your Honor. We have forensic accounting records that show Mrs. Black siphoned $400,000 of retirement savings into shell companies. We have proof that she used marital funds to purchase real estate for her paramour. We have communications proving conspiracy to hide assets." He dropped the binder onto the table with a heavy thud. "And most disturbingly, Your Honor, we have evidence that Mrs. Black took out a $2 million life insurance policy on my client without his knowledge, and then discussed with her lover how she hoped the stress of these proceedings would cause my client to die." The courtroom gasped. Even the judge looked shocked. "That is a lie," Victoria screamed, standing up. "He is lying. Thomas, tell them he is lying." I stood up slowly. I looked at my wife. I looked at the fear in her eyes, the desperation. "Sit down, Victoria," I said, my voice calm and cold. She looked at me, and for the first time in 40 years, she didn't see the husband she could bully. She saw a stranger. She saw the man who had taught Anthony Russo how to fight. Judge Harrison banged his gavel. "Sit down, Mrs. Black," the judge ordered, his face stern. "Mr. Russo, you may proceed." Anthony nodded to his associates. One of them hit a key on the laptop. The large screen on the wall flickered to life. "Let's start with the bank statements," Anthony said, his voice smooth as silk. "And let's talk about a company called Dave Consulting." I sat back in my chair. I watched Ashford trying to whisper frantically to a pale Victoria. I watched Anthony Russo prowl the courtroom like a lion in his own kingdom. And for the first time in months, I didn't feel old. I didn't feel tired. I felt justice coming, and it tasted sweet. Mrs. Black took the stand. She smoothed her skirt and looked at the jury box, even though there was no jury. She looked at Judge Harrison with wide, innocent eyes, trying to summon tears on command. She was good at this. She had spent 40 years perfecting the art of the victim. But Anthony Russo was not an audience member. He was a hunter. He approached the witness stand, slowly holding a remote control in his hand. He did not yell. He did not posture. He spoke with a deadly quiet precision. Mrs. Black, Anthony began. "You stated in your initial filing that my client, Mr. Thomas Black, exercised total financial control over you and left you destitute. Is that correct?" "Yes." Victoria sniffed, dabbing her dry eyes with a tissue. "He was a tyrant. I never knew where our money went." Anthony nodded. He pointed the remote at the screen. A bank statement appeared, magnified 10 times. It showed a wire transfer of $50,000. "Can you explain this transaction dated November 14th, Anthony asked. $50,000 sent to an entity called Dave Consulting LLC. Victoria froze. Her eyes darted to Jonathan Ashford, but her lawyer was busy burying his face in his hands. I do not know what that is, she stammered. Thomas must have done that. He handled the accounts. Anthony clicked the remote. A new document appeared. It was a bank authorization form. Is this your signature? Mrs. Black, Anthony asked. Victoria squinted at the screen. It was undeniable. Her flamboyant looping signature was right there above the line that authorized the transfer. I might have signed it, she said, her voice rising in pitch. Thomas made me sign things. I did not know what they were. Anthony clicked the remote again. The screen changed. A photograph appeared. It was high resolution. It showed a man and a woman sitting by a pool. The water was turquoise. The sky was impossibly blue. The woman was Victoria, wearing a designer swimsuit and holding a cocktail. The man was younger, fit, and tanned. He had his arm around her. They were laughing. Do you recognize this photo? Mrs. Black, Anthony asked, his voice hardening. It was taken at the Las Ventanas Resort in Cabo San Lucas on November 16th, 2 days after the wire transfer. The courtroom was silent. You could hear the hum of the projector. That is just a friend, Victoria whispered, her face turning a sickly shade of gray. I was there for a church retreat. A church retreat, Anthony repeated, with Mr. David Miller, a personal trainer. He clicked the remote again. Another photo. This one showed Victoria and Dave at a dinner table holding hands. On the table was a bottle of wine that cost $500. And who paid for this retreat? Mrs. Black, Anthony asked. Because according to the credit card statement linked to your name, this trip cost $12,000. Victoria said nothing. She looked like a trapped animal. Anthony took a step closer. He was relentless. Let's talk about the condo, Mrs. Black. He clicked the remote. A property deed appeared on the screen. Unit 42B, River North. Purchased 3 months ago. The deed is in the name of David Miller. But the down payment, $200,000, came from a cashier's check issued by your joint savings account. Anthony turned to face her fully. Did you steal $200,000 from your husband's retirement fund to buy a bachelor pad for your lover, Mrs. Black? No, Victoria shrieked. It was an investment. Dave said it was an investment. He said we would flip it. Anthony pounced on the word. So you admit you were partners. You admit you took the money. Victoria realized her mistake. She looked around the room frantically. She looked at me. She looked at the judge. He made me do it, she wailed, pointing a trembling finger at the empty space where Dave should have been. Dave told me Thomas was going to die soon anyway. He told me the money was just sitting there. He said he loved me. He said he would take care of me. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Anthony raised his voice over the noise. Mrs. Black, do you understand what perjury is? Do you understand that lying under oath regarding financial assets in a divorce proceeding is a felony? Do you understand that you could be facing 5 years in prison for fraud? Victoria crumbled. It wasn't a graceful faint. She slumped forward onto the railing of the witness stand, sobbing loudly and ugly. It is not my fault, she screamed, her voice cracking. Dave made me do it. He said Thomas was old and boring. He said I deserved better. I just wanted to be happy. Why can't I be happy? She was confessing to everything. The affair, the theft, the conspiracy. She wasn't crying because she was sorry. She was crying because she had been caught. She was crying because her fantasy world had collided with the hard wall of reality and shattered into a million pieces. Anthony looked at her with pure disgust. He turned to the judge. No further questions, Your Honor. He walked back to our table and sat down. He didn't look triumphant. He looked grim. He looked like a man who had just cleaned out a septic tank. I looked at Victoria sobbing on the stand, and I felt nothing. The anger was gone. The hurt was gone. There was only a vast, empty space where my love used to be. She was a stranger to me now, a pathetic, dangerous stranger. Judge Harrison cleared his throat. The sound was like a gavel strike. Mrs. Black stepped down, the judge ordered. Victoria stumbled back to her seat. Jonathan Ashford moved his chair away from her, creating a physical distance as if her stupidity was contagious. The judge looked at the evidence on the screen. He looked at the bank statements. He looked at the photos. Then he looked at me. Mr. Russo, the judge said, "Does the respondent have a closing statement?" Anthony stood up. "Only this, Your Honor. My client worked for 40 years as a public school teacher. He served his community. He saved lives, including mine. He trusted his wife. He gave her everything, and she repaid him by trying to bankrupt him and wishing for his death. We ask for the maximum penalty allowed by civil law." Judge Harrison nodded. He adjusted his glasses and looked at Victoria. His expression was one of cold fury. "I have sat on this bench for 20 years, Mrs. Black," the judge said, his voice quiet and terrifying. "I have seen greed. I have seen betrayal. But I have rarely seen such a calculated and malicious attempt to destroy a spouse." He picked up a pen. "The petitioner's request for spousal support is denied with prejudice." Victoria let out a sob. "Furthermore," the judge continued, "the court finds that the petitioner engaged in the dissipation of marital assets to the tune of $400,000. Under state law, this constitutes economic misconduct. Therefore, the court orders an uneven distribution of the remaining assets." He looked at me. "Mr. Black, you are awarded 100% of the marital home. You are awarded 100% of your pension." Victoria gasped. "But I have nowhere to go," she cried. The judge ignored her. "Furthermore, the court is issuing an immediate freezing order on all assets held by Mr. David Miller pending a civil suit for the recovery of the stolen funds. We will get that money back, Mrs. Black, and it will go back to your husband. As for you, you will leave this courtroom with exactly what you brought into the marriage. Nothing." He banged the gavel. "Court is adjourned." The sound of the gavel was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of chains breaking. I stood up. Anthony patted me on the back. "We did it, Thomas," he said softly. "It is over." I looked across the aisle. Victoria was sitting there, stunned. Ashford was packing his briefcase, ignoring her. Suddenly there was a commotion at the back of the room. Lucas came running down the aisle. He had been sitting in the back row, watching his inheritance evaporate. He looked terrified. "Dad!" he shouted, pushing past the bar. "Dad, wait!" He ran up to me, his eyes wide and pleading. He grabbed my arm. "Dad, I didn't know." He stammered. "Mom lied to me. She told me it was her money. She told me you wanted to sell the house." "I was tricked, Dad. I swear." I looked at his hand on my sleeve. I looked at his face. It was the face of a man who realized his meal ticket had just been canceled. I gently removed his hand from my arm. "Do not call me Dad," I said, my voice calm. Lucas recoiled as if I had slapped him. But I am your son," he whined. "I made a mistake. People make mistakes. You have to forgive me." I looked him in the eye. "You took $20,000 to watch me die, Lucas. That is not a mistake. That is a choice." I turned away from him. "Get out of my sight," I said. "Go get a job. Pay your own debts. And if you ever come near my house again, I will call the police." I turned my back on him. I heard him sputtering. I heard him trying to argue, but I walked away. I walked toward Anthony, who was waiting for me by the door. We walked out of the courtroom together. The hallway was crowded, but the path cleared for us. I pushed open the double doors of the courthouse and stepped out into the afternoon sun. The rain had stopped. The sky was a brilliant, piercing blue. The air smelled of wet concrete and exhaust and freedom. Behind me, I could hear Victoria wailing in the corridor, blaming the lawyer, blaming the judge, blaming everyone but herself. No one was listening to her. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs. I felt light. Anthony loosened his tie. "Well, Thomas," he said, "that was satisfying. What do you want to do now? I can have a car take you home." I looked at him. I looked at the hot dog cart on the corner. The steam was rising from the metal bin, carrying the smell of mustard and onions. "Do you remember what we used to eat after those detention sessions?" I asked. Anthony smiled. A real boyish smile. "Chili dogs," he said, "with extra onions." "My treat," I said. We walked to the cart. We bought 2 hot dogs and 2 sodas. We sat on a concrete bench outside the courthouse, surrounded by pigeons and busy lawyers. We ate in silence, watching the city move around us. I was 70 years old. I was single. I had lost the family I thought I had. But as I sat there next to the man who had once been a lost boy and was now my savior, I realized I hadn't lost everything. I had found my dignity. I had found the truth. And I had found a son. Not the one by blood, but the one by spirit. The hot dog tasted better than any pot roast Victoria had ever made. It tasted like victory. Life often teaches us the hardest lessons when we least expect them. I learned that blood does not make a family, loyalty does. I learned that silence is not weakness, and that standing up for yourself is the only way to survive a betrayal. Never let anyone convince you that you are too old or too weak to fight for what is yours. Trust your instincts, protect your future, and remember that the people who truly love you will never ask you to destroy yourself for their benefit. If you enjoyed this story of justice served, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. It helps more than you know. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Let me know in the comments if you have ever had to fight for your dignity against the people who were supposed to protect it. Stay strong, and I will see you in the next story.